All right, Alexander, let's talk about the state of the world economy, of the global economy, and let's let's start with Russia and the ruble. Interestingly enough, the ruble is did not crash to the levels that the Biden White House was hoping and the EU was hoping. It's actually risen a little bit in the
Yeah,
past couple of days, which is kind of odd. But what is the state of the Russian economy? And then we'll talk about the EU and the US and the global economy in general as
yeah.
well, with all
I
these
mean,
sanctions and everything going on.
right.
The
I mean,
ruble in Russia.
yeah. I mean, the thing to understand is we've got to look at what's going to happen to the Russian economy as a result of the sanctions and what the sanctions were intended to achieve. When the decision was made to sanction the Russian central bank and to freeze its reserves, the openly expressed intention was to cause the ruble to go into free fall, create an absolute financial crash. This would supposedly have led to panic in the banking system. I don't know whether you remember we had over the weekend when that was announced all those pictures from Moscow of people supposedly lining up at ATM machines, all that sort of thing. So there was supposed to be a massive, overwhelming financial crash, hyperinflation, all of those sort of things. It didn't happen. And it's not going to happen because the Russians had clearly prepared for it. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt now that they did prepare for it. So they took all the right decisions with interest rates, providing liquidity to their financial system. They clearly have significant financial reserves. And of course, they very rapidly imposed capital controls. And the result is that the banking system in Russia continues to operate smoothly. Ruble deposits have apparently increased without, money printing. There's increasing moves towards getting the ruble in terms of its internal operations backed by gold and other metals, palladium, platinum, titanium, all of those sort of things. And apparently that has been very successful. I mean, there's been apparently a heavy demand for gold, more than the banks were temporarily able to meet. But that has led to a strengthening of the ruble internally. So at least for the moment, the financial system in Russia has survived, and it is functioning normally. Now, the other big attack that has happened is that there was an attempt, obviously, to cut off Russia's oil and gas exports. That seems to be failing because Russia is too important in terms of its energy supplies to the world for that to be done at least any time soon. So the European Union continues to import gas from Russia. Oil supplies continue to flow out of Russia. I was reading on Zero Hedge that there's even a fleet of tankers from Russia heading to the United States to supply crude to the United States before the guillotine on, importing oil from Russia supposedly falls. I've had a report from a third party that, in fact, even after that happens, it would still be possible in the US to import Russian oil via middlemen. And of course, we've also seen how the Russians are now working on with countries like India and other countries like that to sell oil for rupees and other currencies. So I think that's going to take a while to sort out. And then, but anyway, that seems to be happening. So the attempt to sort of suffocate the Russian economy by closing off its exports didn't succeed either. By the way, I'm far from convinced that if all the exports had been closed off in that way, that would in and of itself have been enough to cause the economy to collapse. I doubt it. I think that overestimates, again, the importance of the export trade to the overall economy in Russia. But then the third thing that's happened, and the Russians certainly believe that it's been deliberately orchestrated, is you get all these Western companies that work in Russia You get it, they're all pulling out, and to a certain extent, they're stopping deliveries of spares and things like that to Russia in order to create artificial shortages. But again, the Russians appear to think that they can cope with this problem, that there will be a period of higher inflation, that's inevitable, and higher unemployment. And in other words, there will be a difficult transition period, but they're confident that they can get through. The key trading partners like China, India, Latin American countries, ASEAN, even to a certain extent South Korea, remain open to them and continue to trade with them. And of course, they have very big opportunities eventually for increasing domestic production of consumer goods themselves. So, in summary, they're going to experience a recession this year. I mean, that's an absolute given. I mean, it's impossible for an economy to overcome this kind of shock without going through a recession. So there will be a recession, there will be higher inflation, but they seem confident that they can keep the whole situation under control, that there will be no hyperinflation, no financial collapse, no collapse of the economy, and at the end of this process, in about a year's time, you start to see the economy go back into growth. And at that point, by the way, the experience of countries that have been under similar sanctions pressure is that what you start to then see is a very rapid rise in industrial production, because local manufacturers and business people then start to make up the spaces which have been vacated by the foreign companies. So you start to see a very sharp rise in industrial production. With their much stronger financial system, what the Russians are hoping to achieve, and are expecting to achieve, is that they will avoid the kind of inflation crises that we saw in countries like Iran. Iran has seen that surge in industrial production, but it's never been able to keep its financial system operating in the same smooth way, and the result is very high inflation in Iran. The Russians seem confident that they can avoid it.
So the strategy to try and get China to go against Russia and try and get India to go against Russia seems to be failing as well. I've been reading a lot of statements from China, the Chinese government, and the Chinese media, which is every day the statements are more and more in favor of Russia, and they're saying that they have Russia's back. I mean, it looks like Jake Sullivan really, really blew it in his meeting in Rome. And I'm getting the same type of feel from India as well, that all the threats, and many of these veiled threats towards India, are also backfiring, because it seems like the Indians are coming out with more and more statements which are saying, you know what, we're going to do whatever we want that is in the best interest of our country as a sovereign nation. I mean, the Indians are also saying, we're going to do whatever we want to do that is in our best interests. Leave us alone. I mean, you're getting these statements which, like 2-3 weeks ago, Sullivan and Psaki were saying, Russia's going to be isolated, and we're going to destroy their economy, and we're going to work on China, and we're going to hammer away at India. You're not getting any of that, it seems.
No,
is that correct?
It's absolutely correct. In fact, as you correctly said, I mean, I follow the Chinese media more closely than I do the Indian. But in China, in relation to China, the Chinese stance has actually steadily hardened with each passing day, that they're going to continue normal commerce with Russia. And of course, they're clearly not going to impose any kind of sanctions on Russia. In fact, I actually read an article in the Chinese media which said that Western pressure on China to try to get China to reverse its policies towards Russia is sinister. I mean, that's the word that they use, that, the West is behaving in a sinister fashion. It's very strong words, and it doesn't quite say evil, but, perhaps it's an even stronger word than evil. So that's the Chinese stance. And I get the same sense with the Indian, by the way. And I would add, that India and China together, these are two big economies. They can replace pretty much everything that the Russians imported from the West. To an extent that I think people in the West don't fully understand. And if you throw in the ASEAN countries as well, it's the same with them. So, and of course, that doesn't even take into account what the Russians might start to do domestically. So I think that the attempt to isolate Russia has clearly failed. And in fact, you're even starting to see articles beginning to appear in certainly the British media, which is absolutely vehemently hostile to everything to do with Russia. But they all seem to be accepting that the attempt to isolate Russia has been a failure. So a difficult year for Russia, but one that they can believe that they can keep under control and which they will get through.
The price to pay for freedom.
That's exactly what Putin said, by the way. And both Putin and Lavrov and others have been making that precise point.
Yeah, exactly. Let's focus now on the EU and the US, the collective West. There are a lot of articles now talking about a diesel fuel shortage.
Yeah, no.
Which is, I think that with each week and each month, we're going to have a different commodity and a different resource kind of highlighted as, we have a shortage in X. We have a shortage in Y. I think this is going to be like a weekly phenomenon. Now we're talking about diesel fuel. Next week, it could be fertilizer. The week after that, it could be nickel. I don't know. But I think that we're going to see a steady stream of these articles kind of, popping up in our web browsers and our mobile devices. And people are going to be like, what's going on here? What do you mean there's a nickel shortage? How did that happen? Why did that happen? And then Saki's going to get on TV and say, it's Putin's fault. But what do you make of the EU economies? What do you make of the US economies?
You're absolutely right. What we are seeing, and this is the thing to understand, is we're going to get inflation. I mean, when you hear about shortages like this, supply shortages which are becoming embedded across the system, that inevitably is going to lead to very much higher inflation. It's now at 8% officially, 7.9%. In February in the US, that was February, we haven't yet had a March readout, and that's coming. And the problem is, there doesn't seem to be any real strategy about what to do with it. The best that they can come up with, as far as I can tell, is to send Boris Johnson to the Gulf to try to talk to the Saudis, which doesn't seem to be any kind of strategy, actually. So they don't have a strategy, because I don't think ever really they thought this through or understood it properly, because they didn't consult with their experts. And some very interesting things appear to be happening. Firstly, the Fed increased interest rates, but the amount that it increased the interest rates by was 25 base points, which is practically a token amount. I don't think anybody thinks that's going to make any real difference. And I don't think anybody really seriously expects that they're going to increase interest rates to 2.5%, which is what they say they will. So that already points to higher inflation for me. And the other thing that's happened, and I find it very interesting, and it's a complex story, and I'm not sure that I know exactly what's happened, but the Russians were due to make an interest payment on Eurobonds, on a Eurobond yesterday. And there was a lot of speculation that they wouldn't make that payment in foreign currency, in dollars, because of the sanctions on their central bank. But in fact, the Russians gave instructions to an American bank which holds foreign currency, and the Russian media is saying that the American bank paid the interest on instructions from Moscow to the creditors in full in dollars. Now, that's what the Russians are saying. Now, it's not clear whether that's happened or not. I'm getting reports in the Financial Times that, yes, it probably has been paid in that way, but this isn't any great departure from the sanctions because the sanctions allow for unwinding of positions up to the end of May. I have to say, I don't believe the last at all. I don't think that's really the case. I don't think that was ever the point, that about allowing the Russians to pay debts, state debts, sovereign debts in that fashion. So what I'm guessing has happened is that there's been consultations between the American bank, which apparently was instructed by the Russians to pay the interest payment, and the Fed, and presumably the Treasury Department. And if this payment has indeed been made, which I'm sure it has because the Russians say it has, and why would they lie about it? If it has been paid, then the Fed and the Treasury Department gave the green light for this payment, which suggests that they do not want to see even a technical default because they're worried about its effects on the larger financial system. So that's how it looks to me. Higher inflation, shortages of commodities, as you said, shortages of diesel fuel, shortages of food, very severe shortages of food. That's now a given, and higher food prices. Problems, no doubt, with every single part of the supply chain. Shortages of neon gas going to Taiwan, making it more difficult for Taiwan to produce its semiconductors. Strategic metals being slowed down, affecting, for example, production of aircraft, production of cars being affected because there's less aluminium in working through the system, at least in the United States and in Europe, translating into higher prices for people in Europe and in the United States, with the very, very real possibility that this inflation now becomes structural, which means permanent.
What about the European Union? There's a lot of focus on the U.S. and the U.S. economy, and I think a lot of what you said was focused on the U.S. economy. But what about the EU? I mean, we've said it in many programs, and you've said specifically that the EU is, and I think your quote was, the EU is going to turn into some sort of backwater.
I think
from
so.
an economic standpoint.
Absolutely.
How is the EU faring, or how are they going to fare with everything that's going on? I mean, Germany
Well,
is definitely trying to find a way out of this. You can tell that
yeah,
Olaf Scholz has kind of woken up and said, "Oh crap, what
yeah,
the hell have we done?"
exactly. Yes. But I mean, it's too late now. I think they climbed onto this runaway train. They did that at the Munich Security Conference. And when the train is hurtling at 200 kilometers an hour, you can't just get off. I mean, it's not easy to get off. It's very difficult. I don't see that there's any way back. And for the moment, the Russians are still sending natural gas to Germany and Europe. But I am absolutely sure as, anything, that business of the Russians supplying gas to their European customers is going to start winding down, and the Russians will slow down their sales of food and other products to Europe, and all of that will steadily be redirected eastwards. And what has happened is that the Europeans, the Germans in particular, have cut themselves off from their raw materials periphery. They've isolated themselves. It's not the Russians who are isolated, it's the Europeans who've isolated themselves. And that means that they've now created a structural problem of much higher costs in Europe. Remember, also, Europe has higher costs anyway because it's got its various policies, its green policies, its welfare policies, all of which come at a very high cost. So it's going to become an increasingly uncompetitive economy. German economy is going to become an increasingly uncompetitive economy. It's going to face inflation issues like it's never faced before. That's inevitably, over time, going to create more stresses within the financial system in Europe. and in the Eurozone especially. But I cannot see how the Europeans now can expect to compete effectively with the East Asian producers, not just China, but the East Asian producers who will continue to receive energy, food, raw materials at lower cost.
Yeah. Real quick, final question. What do you make, though, of the EU statements that they're going to wean themselves off of the dependency of Russia within the next year? Because you're saying they cut
Impossible.
themselves
I,
off
I, I,
from their
yeah, I know.
resources.
I mean,
They've isolated themselves, but the EU is making a lot of
yeah,
statements saying that they have a plan in place where
yes, I
they're
know.
going to completely wean off of Russian energy, Russian food, Russian commodities, all of it in the next year.
Yes, I mean, first of all, trying to do that, would come at an enormous cost. I mean, and that is a cost that would endure. So even if you could do it within a year, you're adding a massive burden upon yourself in order to achieve it. That is one. The second is, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't actually believe they will achieve it. In fact, I'm going to make a prediction. Not only will they not achieve it, but it's quite possible, even likely, that come the end of this year, we will find that they are as dependent on Russian oil, gas, and food as they always have been, because finding alternatives is not easy.
I can see them
You
making
know,
many trips to Moscow.
well. I mean,
I can see all
that
of
we
Schultz
do.
ending up in
Very,
Moscow
very
if he's still in
difficult
office.
very difficult for them to do, actually. I mean, Scholz is now calling Putin on a regular basis, but I mean, he's finding Putin in an implacable mood. And why would the Russians trust him? Why would the Russians trust any German chancellor now? I mean, to be straightforward about this, I mean, Merkel cheated them over the Minsk agreement. Why would they expect that the Germans, any future German chancellor, say Friedrich Merz, if he were to become chancellor, could be trusted? Instead. I think they'll decide that they can't trust them, and I think that that's now a given. And where Germany leads, of course, Europe follows. And I think this problem is going to now, as I said, become structural.
All right, a final question. We talked about the EU, we talked about the US. What about the UK? What about the
What
UK
about the
economy?
UK?
How is this affecting them?
Well, we have exactly the same problems as the EU does, because we are still tied into so many aspects of the EU economic system. So, I mean, one of the fantasies that's been much discussed is the fact that that we don't import gas from Russia. It turns out that wasn't even true, but we are part of the European the natural gas market in Europe, and you can't just change that overnight. Now, what Britain ought to have done, what global Britain should have been, is doing deals with everybody, opening your doors to everybody, doing business with everybody. When I was, involved to some extent with the financial services industry in Britain, not as a dealer or anything like that, but providing legal advice and that sort of thing. What people used to say is that the city is always open for business. We've now shut the doors on much of our business. We've shown to people that the idea that if you park your money in Britain, it is safe, that simply isn't true anymore. So I think that we have done massive damage to ourselves, to the point that, again, I have to say this, I'm deeply sceptical about the economic future of Britain. We had this opportunity with Brexit, and we've thrown it away. There's even been an article in the New Statesman, which is a sort of left-of-centre Blairite magazine, which says that Ukraine has cancelled Brexit.
I agree with that. All right. We'll leave it there. TheDuran.locals.com, everybody. If you're watching this from Rumble, you will see a button up top, which takes you to our locals community, takes you directly to our locals community. A red maroon button on the top of the screen if you're seeing this from a web browser. And go to the Duran shop, use the code Good Day, and get 10% off all merchandise from our shop. There is the mug. Good day. Take care.